You absolutely will not believe what happened when our power-crazed HOA president, Barbara, decided to bulldoze my disabled sister, Amelia's wheelchair ramp, while she was away at work. But what this entitled neighbor didn't realize was that Amelia wasn't just any resident. She was the governor of our state, and this was about to become the single biggest mistake of Barbara's HOA career. But how did our entire neighborhood end up embroiled in a national scandal? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more wild stories about entitled neighbors and HOA battles. The bright yellow piece of paper, practically glued to our front door, sent a jolt of fury through me. It was the fifth HOA violation notice this month, all fixated on Amelia's wheelchair ramp. I crumpled it, the paper crackling in my fist, and tossed it onto the ever-growing pile of Barbara Miller's official warnings. Just then, I heard the familiar whir of Amelia's electric wheelchair ascending the ramp behind me. "Another love letter from our delightful neighbor?" Amelia asked, a weary smile playing on her lips. The dark circles under her eyes were a stark reminder of how exhausted she was from her demanding new job. But she never complained. Not about the grueling work, not about the horrific car accident that had put her in the wheelchair 6 months ago, and certainly not about Barbara's relentless harassment. You'd think being HOA president would keep her busy enough without practically stalking our house, I thought, my gaze drawn to the kitchen window. There was Barbara, standing in her driveway like a hawk, snapping pictures of our ramp with her phone. Her perfectly highlighted hair and designer workout outfit couldn't mask the sheer spite radiating from her face. It was a look I knew all too well. I vividly remembered the day we installed the ramp. We'd followed every single rule to the letter. We'd hired a licensed contractor, secured all the necessary permits from the city, and even used the exact shade of agreeable gray paint to match our house trim. But naturally, Barbara had shown up before the concrete had even fully dried, waving the HOA rulebook like it was some sacred scroll. Section 8, paragraph 3, clearly states that all external modifications must be approved by the board, she declared, her voice dripping with faux concern. "We have to maintain our property values, you understand?" The saccharine sweetness was almost more infuriating than outright anger. What truly gnawed at me was how Barbara kept accidentally scheduling the HOA meetings about our ramp for times when Amelia was demonstrably unavailable. Not that Amelia was free at other times. She was busy, running the entire state. That's right, my sister isn't just any homeowner, she's the governor. But we deliberately kept that quiet in the neighborhood, hoping to maintain some semblance of privacy during her recovery. It was a naive hope in retrospect. Just last week, I caught Barbara out there at 6 a.m., measuring the ramp with a tape measure, a full 10 feet long, regulation width, everything perfectly to code. When I confronted her, she'd stammered something about doing her duty as HOA president. From that moment on, I started documenting everything. I took videos, saved every single notice, and kept a meticulous log of every interaction. Something deep in my gut told me we'd need it. This morning, however, felt different, ominous. As I helped Amelia into her specially equipped car for her physical therapy appointment, I noticed Barbara huddled with 2 men in crisp dark suits near her house. She was pointing at our ramp, gesticulating wildly. One of the men was scribbling furiously in a notebook. The other was snapping even more pictures. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "I don't like this," I said to Amelia, my voice tight with anxiety. "Maybe it's time we let them know who they're really dealing with." Amelia shook her head firmly. "No, David, I won't use my position for personal gain. We'll handle this the right way, through the proper channels." But as I watched Barbara's triumphant, almost gleeful smile, while she handed thick manila envelopes to the men in suits, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that following the rules might not be enough this time. Not against someone like Barbara. I pulled out my phone and started recording, just in case. Barbara's voice, carried on the gentle morning breeze, was unmistakable. Yes, we'll need that bulldozer here first thing tomorrow morning. The board has already approved the removal. My heart stopped. They wouldn't really tear down a wheelchair ramp, would they? As Amelia's car disappeared around the corner, I rushed inside, my mind racing. I needed to check our security cameras, grab our meticulously organized folder of permits. But what I found in our files would change everything. It was a discovery that would make Barbara wish she'd never even heard of our address. I was halfway through my bowl of Cheerios when the guttural rumble of heavy machinery vibrated through the house. My spoon clattered against the ceramic as I bolted to the window, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. There she was, Barbara, standing in our front yard, resplendent in her signature red blazer and perfectly coiffed blonde hair. She was pointing at our wheelchair ramp like a general directing an attack, while a man in a hard hat nodded along. My fingers fumbled for my phone, starting a recording as I burst out the front door. The morning sun was barely peeking over the horizon, and most of our neighbors were still blissfully asleep. A bright yellow bulldozer, looking monstrously out of place in our quiet suburban street, sat menacingly in our driveway. Its metal blade gleamed, reflecting the early light like a predatory eye. Two workers in orange safety vests were measuring the ramp with bright yellow tape measures, their movements precise and disturbingly professional. Barbara clutched a stack of papers to her chest like they were gold bullion. "What do you think you're doing?" I yelled, my voice shaking far more than I wanted it to. Barbara's face lit up with that same infuriatingly fake smile she always plastered on at HOA meetings. "Oh good, you're home, David," she chirped, her designer heels sinking slightly into our freshly watered grass. "I have here an emergency order from the HOA board. This structure is in direct violation of community guidelines, section 4.23. She waved a paper in my face, but snatched it back before I could grab it. I took a deep breath, channeling the calm, controlled demeanor Amelia had perfected during her campaign speeches. "Barbara, we submitted all the proper paperwork. We have full approval from the city. The ramp is 36 inches wide. The slope is precisely 112. Everything is up to code." "The city isn't the HOA, dear," she interrupted, her smile unwavering, a mask of condescending politeness. "And as president of the board, it's my duty to maintain our community standards. This ramp is an eyesore. It's dragging down property values. Just look at how it clashes with the neighborhood aesthetic." Her voice dripped with disdain. The bulldozer revved its engine, a deep, throaty growl, and my stomach plummeted. I frantically pulled up the property maps on my phone, the ones Amelia had insisted I save, showing our property lines and all the permits, and shoved it in Barbara's face. "This is illegal. You can't just demolish someone's property without proper notice or a court order." But Barbara just laughed, a high-pitched, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Notice was given 3 weeks ago via certified mail. We have the receipt right here." She produced another paper displaying a signature I'd never seen before. Forgery? It wouldn't have surprised me. I frantically dialed Amelia's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, she was in that crucial, closed-door budget meeting all day. I tried her assistant, her security team, anyone I could think of, but no one was answering. Panic clawed at my throat. The construction workers started placing orange cones around our driveway, creating a perimeter. One of them, I noticed, looked hesitant, repeatedly checking his paperwork and whispering to his colleague, pointing at something that clearly didn't seem right. A flicker of hope ignited within me. "If you do this, see," I warned, my voice gaining strength, fueled by desperation and righteous anger, "you'll be hearing from our lawyers. This is a blatant violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." I started live streaming everything on my phone, making sure to capture every single detail, every smug expression on Barbara's face. Her smile finally faltered, just for a split second. "The HOA is exempt from—" "No HOA is exempt from federal law," I shouted, loud enough that lights started flicking on in neighboring houses. Old Mr. Rodriguez, our neighbor from across the street, cautiously poked his head out his front door, then quickly retreated back inside when he saw Barbara. But she had already turned to the bulldozer operator, giving him a sharp, decisive nod. The machine roared to life, its treads grinding against our driveway. I watched in helpless horror as the massive blade lowered, inching closer and closer to the ramp that had taken us weeks to get properly installed, the ramp that represented Amelia's independence and freedom. "Last chance, Barbara," I said, my phone held steady, my voice surprisingly calm despite the turmoil raging inside me. "You're making a huge mistake." She turned back to me, her eyes cold and hard, despite the persistent plastic smile. "The only mistake was allowing this monstrosity to be built in the first place. Sometimes, people need to learn that rules exist for a reason." The bulldozer blade made contact with the edge of the ramp, a horrifying screech of metal on concrete echoing through the quiet morning air. I kept recording, my hands remarkably steady as chunks of our carefully constructed ramp began to crumble, reduced to rubble under the relentless force of the machine. What they didn't notice was that Mr. Rodriguez had returned, this time armed with his own camera, and he wasn't alone. More neighbors were gathering, phones raised, recording the unfolding scene, a silent, growing army of witnesses. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Amelia's head of security. "Stay calm, keep recording, help is 3 minutes out." A genuine smile, the first of the morning, spread across my face. I watched Barbara, now practically conducting the destruction of our ramp like it was some twisted symphony, completely oblivious to the impending storm. She was so focused on her petty victory, so blinded by her own self-importance, that she didn't notice the sleek, black SUVs turning onto our street, nor the distant, yet rapidly approaching wail of sirens. Sometimes, the biggest mistakes stem from the smallest oversights, like failing to realize that your seemingly ordinary neighbor is, in fact, one of the most powerful people in the state. And Barbara was about to learn that lesson in the most spectacular, public way imaginable. The moment our quiet, unassuming suburban street transformed into something resembling a high-stakes action movie is forever etched in my memory. Just as Barbara was busy high-fiving her cronies, celebrating their triumph over the eyesore, the first black SUV rounded the corner. Then another and another. Red and blue lights began flashing, reflecting off the windows of the houses, turning the scene into a chaotic, surreal spectacle. My hands, surprisingly, were steady as I pressed record on my phone. This was going to be epic. The look on Barbara's face was priceless. It morphed from smug satisfaction to utter bewilderment as 3 state police cruisers pulled up, followed by 5 identical, intimidating black government vehicles. The neighbors, who had been peeking through their curtains all morning, now poured out onto their front lawns, a growing, murmuring crowd. Everyone knew instinctively that something monumental was about to unfold. "What is all this?" Barbara demanded, her voice cracking, losing its usual air of authority. "This is a private neighborhood matter." That's when Amelia's lead, security detail, stepped out, a stoic figure scanning the area with practiced efficiency before opening the back door of the center SUV. The street fell utterly silent as my sister, Amelia, rolled out in her wheelchair, wearing her official governor's blazer and the stern, unwavering expression I'd only seen her use during major press conferences or critical legislative debates. "Actually, Mrs. Miller," Amelia's voice rang out, clear and strong, amplified by the sudden hush. "This became a state matter the moment you violated federal disability protection laws." She wheeled forward, her security team moving in perfect, synchronized formation around her, a protective phalanx. Not to mention destroying state property without authorization. Barbara's face cycled through at least 5 distinct emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Shock, disbelief, denial, fear, and finally, a flicker of panicked understanding. "State property," she squeaked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Amelia continued, pulling out her own phone. "Would you like to see the deed, or should we discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act first? I'm particularly familiar with Title II, having just signed new state protections into law last month." The crowd of neighbors swelled, a palpable wave of collective anticipation rippling through them. I spotted at least a dozen phones recording, capturing every moment. Mrs. Jenkins, from across the street, was already live streaming on Facebook, her commentary breathless and excited. But the HOA bylaws clearly state," Barbara stammered, backing away slowly, clutching her precious violation notices like a shield. "Interestingly, you should mention those," Amelia cut in, smoothly, motioning to her assistant, who stepped forward, carrying a thick, imposing binder. "My legal team has been meticulously reviewing your HOA's bylaws all afternoon. Would you like to know what we've found?" I watched, mesmerized, as Barbara's youth HOA board members, her loyal sycophants, began to subtly distance themselves from her. A smart move, I thought, a flicker of grim satisfaction passing through me. Multiple violations of state housing laws, discriminatory practices, and— Amelia paused, letting the suspense build. Irregular financial records going back 3 years. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. I zoomed in on Barbara's face with my phone, capturing the moment her complexion turned whiter than the pristine violation notices she so dearly loved. "This isn't— I didn't know," Barbara sputtered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before our eyes. "That I was the governor?" Amelia finished for her, her voice laced with steely resolve. "Or that bulldozing a disabled person's access ramp without proper notice or permits is a federal offense." 2 state investigators stepped forward, notebooks in hand, their expressions grim and official. Behind them, I could see news vans, their satellite dishes extended like hungry antennae, starting to pull up at the end of our street. The media circus had arrived. "Mrs. Miller," one investigator spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We'll need you to come with us to answer some questions about today's events and these financial discrepancies." As Barbara was led away, still muttering incoherently about property values and HOA bylaws, Amelia turned to address the assembled crowd. She looked every bit the leader she was, even sitting in her wheelchair, surrounded by the shattered remnants of our ramp, a symbol of both injustice and resilience. "My fellow neighbors," she began, her voice resonating with genuine emotion, "today we have an opportunity to discuss what community truly means." She gestured to the destroyed ramp. "This isn't just about me or my access to my home. This is about every person's right to live with dignity and with equal access in their own community." The faces in the crowd reflected a mixture of emotions: shame, anger, regret, and most importantly, a dawning understanding. But as I watched Barbara being escorted to a police car, still clutching her useless HOA rulebook, I couldn't help but wonder what would become of our once peaceful neighborhood after this explosive, earth-shattering evening? And, perhaps more significantly, how many other HOAs out there were pulling the same despicable tricks that Barbara had been getting away with for years? The morning after the bulldozer incident, as it was quickly becoming known, I woke up to my phone practically vibrating off the nightstand. Our security camera footage had gone viral overnight. News vans, their logos emblazoned on the sides, were already lined up outside our house, transforming our quiet street into a media frenzy. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. My old high school friend, Ethan, who'd become a highly respected civil rights lawyer, called me, his voice buzzing with excitement and disbelief. "David, you won't believe this. I've been digging into Barbara Miller's past, and it's a goldmine of HOA violations." I couldn't believe my eyes when I opened the files he sent. Barbara had been sued 3 times before for similar stunts in other neighborhoods, pulling down fences, towing cars, even removing a child's swing set, all under the guise of maintaining community standards. But she'd always managed to settle quietly, slipping away with a slap on the wrist and a hefty payout, only to resurface and terrorize a new, unsuspecting HOA. This time, though, she'd picked the wrong house, the wrong sister, and definitely the wrong day. Amelia, being the incredible, proactive governor she is, didn't just get mad. She got organized. She called an emergency press conference right there on our front lawn, with the shattered pieces of the ramp serving as a powerful visual backdrop. The reporters went wild when she produced a stack of documents, each one thicker than the last, meticulously detailing how Barbara had broken not just federal disability laws, but also violated a staggering 17 different state housing regulations. It was a masterclass in accountability. But here's where the story takes a truly remarkable turn. Our elderly neighbors, the ones who had always seemed so timid and reserved, started coming forward, one by one, emboldened by Amelia's courage and the overwhelming public support. Mrs. Chen, from across the street, revealed how Barbara had forced her to remove her meticulously cultivated medicinal herb garden, claiming it was unsightly. Mr. Rodriguez, tears welling up in his eyes, showed documentation proving how Barbara had fined him for having a wheelchair lift installed for his veteran father, a proud World War II hero, calling it an unapproved exterior modification. Even the quiet Baker family, who rarely interacted with anyone, spoke up about being threatened with hefty fines for their autistic son's sensory-friendly playground equipment, which Barbara had deemed excessively colorful. The neighborhood I'd known for years, the one I thought was defined by quiet conformity and unspoken rules, suddenly felt different, alive. People were talking to each other, sharing their stories, finding strength in their collective outrage. A sense of community, real community, was blossoming. Barbara, in a desperate attempt to regain control, tried to call an emergency HOA meeting to address these unfounded accusations, but nobody showed up, except for her 2 remaining, pathetically loyal followers from the board. It was a ghost town, a stark contrast to the packed meetings she used to lord over. Meanwhile, Amelia had invited disability rights advocates to our house, and half the neighborhood came to learn about accessible housing rights, fair housing laws, and how to fight back against HOA overreach. It was an impromptu, empowering seminar right there in our living room. Just when we thought things couldn't get any more intense, someone, and to this day we still don't know who, leaked Barbara's HOA financial records. It turned out she'd been using the fines she collected, the money she'd extorted from her neighbors, to pay for her own lavish home renovations, claiming they were board-approved community improvements. The audacity was breathtaking. The HOA's lawyer, sensing the impending legal tsunami, quit on the spot. 3 board members resigned via furious, scathing emails that somehow miraculously found their way to the local news outlets. The dominoes were falling, and Barbara was standing directly in their path. Yet, incredibly, Barbara still wouldn't back down. She showed up at our house the next morning, armed with a cease and desist letter demanding we stop spreading lies about her. What she didn't expect was to walk straight into a meeting between Amelia and the State Housing Commissioner, who was very interested in reviewing every single HOA decision Barbara had made in the last 5 years. The sheer terror in Barbara's eyes when she realized her iron-fisted reign of terror was crumbling around her was almost worth all the drama. Almost. But the best part, the absolute sweetest moment of vindication, was watching our neighbors, one by one, plant "Report Accessible Housing Violations" signs in their yards. Bold, bright signs, a defiant symbol of solidarity. Until Barbara's house stood alone, isolated, a pariah in a sea of unified resistance. The news helicopters circling overhead captured it all. A perfect aerial shot of poetic justice. By sunset, our story had made national headlines. As I watched more neighbors gather on our lawn that evening, sharing food, stories, and plans for a new, truly inclusive HOA, I couldn't help but wonder, how had one wheelchair ramp, one act of malicious destruction, sparked such a massive, transformative change? But the night wasn't over yet. Amelia had just received some very interesting documents about the bulldozing company's connection to Barbara's husband's private contracting business. The plot, as they say, thickened. The next morning, my inbox was flooded with hundreds of messages from people across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. My phone rang non-stop, with reporters clamoring for interviews, eager to learn more about the ramp rage governor, as some were calling Amelia. But what truly grabbed my attention was an email from Mrs. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor, who Barbara had fined last month for having a garden gnome. She had meticulously documented proof of Barbara breaking numerous other HOA rules, seemingly minor infractions, but cumulatively damning. I spent the entire day printing out every single HOA rule and regulation, highlighting, circling, and annotating every instance where Barbara herself had blatantly disregarded the very rules she so ruthlessly enforced. It was a mountain of evidence. Amelia's legal team, working around the clock, discovered that Barbara had never even filed the proper paperwork to become HOA president in the first place. She'd simply taken over when the previous president moved away, and no one had dared to question her authority. The sheer arrogance of it was staggering. The more we dug, the more dirt we unearthed. It was like peeling back the layers of an onion, each layer revealing a more pungent, more offensive odor of corruption and abuse of power. Then, something truly amazing happened. Our story reached Tommy Chen, a famous YouTube lawyer known for his passionate advocacy against unfair housing rules and predatory HOAs. He flew in to meet with Amelia, offering to represent us, pro bono, in a lawsuit against Barbara and the HOA. His video about our case, expertly crafted and filled with righteous indignation, garnered millions of views in just one day. The tide had turned, decisively and irrevocably. Barbara, in a last-ditch, pathetically transparent attempt to salvage her reputation, called another emergency HOA meeting. But this time, the scene was dramatically different. Instead of her usual, sparsely attended gathering of intimidated neighbors, the community center was packed. People who'd never spoken up before, people who'd lived in fear of Barbara's wrath for years, stood up and shared their stories. Mr. Jenkins, his voice trembling with emotion, showed pictures of his daughter's beloved treehouse, a whimsical structure that Barbara had forced him to tear down, claiming it violated height restrictions. The Wilson family, their eyes shining with tears, spoke about their festive Christmas lights, a joyful display that Barbara had deemed too bright and disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic. Amelia, when it was her turn to speak, didn't just talk about the ramp. She unveiled her grand plan, the culmination of weeks of tireless work and unwavering determination. She'd been drafting a new state law, a comprehensive piece of legislation designed to protect homeowners from HOA abuse, to prevent another Barbara Miller from ever wielding such unchecked power again. The room erupted in thunderous applause when she announced the name of the proposed law, the Right to Home Happiness Act. It was a perfect title, encapsulating the spirit of the fight and the hope for a more just future. But the final devastating blow to Barbara's crumbling empire came from our security camera footage. It clearly showed that she had lied on official documents, falsely claiming she had obtained the necessary authorization to bulldoze the ramp. It was perjury, plain and simple. That's when her own lawyer, realizing the depth of her legal peril, dropped her case. He walked away, leaving her to face the consequences alone. 2 days later, we watched a mixture of relief and disbelief as Barbara packed up her prized rose bushes, the ones she'd forced everyone else in the neighborhood to plant to maintain her twisted vision of uniformity, and moved away. The moving van, ironically, had to carefully navigate around the newly poured concrete of our rebuilt ramp. The new HOA board is nothing short of amazing. They transformed the old, dreaded violations office into a welcoming community help center. Instead of sending out threatening fines, they now send out welcome baskets to new neighbors, filled with local goodies and helpful information. They even started a volunteer program to assist elderly residents with home repairs and yard work. Amelia's ramp was rebuilt, of course, but it was more than just a ramp. Local artists transformed it into a vibrant work of art, painting it with colorful flowers and whimsical designs. It even has soft, glowing lights that illuminate it at night, making it a beautiful, welcoming feature of our street. Kids from the neighborhood actually think it's the prettiest thing on our block. Last week, Amelia hosted a barbecue for the entire neighborhood in our backyard. Watching everyone laughing, sharing food, and enjoying each other's company in the very spot where Barbara once stood, screaming about grass height regulations, made me realize something profound. Sometimes, the most terrible, most unjust moments can lead to the most beautiful, most transformative changes. Remember that bulldozing company? They now offer free ramp installations to disabled residents throughout the state, a remarkable act of corporate responsibility and atonement. Their CEO personally apologized to Amelia, his voice thick with genuine remorse. They even established a scholarship fund for students pursuing degrees in disability rights law. The biggest surprise, however, came just yesterday. I received a phone call from the governor's office. I have been promoted to run the state's newly established Homeowner Protection Office. My first job? To travel across the state, teaching other neighborhoods how to transform their HOAs from instruments of oppression into forces for good, into genuine communities. Amelia says we're just getting started. And you know what? Looking back at how much has changed in just 1 year, I believe her. Our story, incredibly, has even made its way into school textbooks, used as a case study in civics classes, an example of how ordinary people can stand up to injustice and create lasting, positive change. But the real victory isn't in the headlines or the new laws or even the viral videos. It's in the small, everyday things. It's in seeing Mrs. Rodriguez's garden gnome army growing larger and more whimsical every week. It's in watching children play freely on their front lawns without fear of arbitrary rules or vindictive neighbors. Barbara's old house just sold last week. The new family. They have 3 kids, 2 dogs, and guess what's prominently displayed in their front yard? A beautiful, brand new wheelchair ramp built for their grandmother. Nobody complained. Instead, 5 neighbors showed up to help them unpack, offering a warm welcome and a helping hand. That's when I knew. We hadn't just changed an HOA, we'd changed minds, we'd changed hearts, we'd built a community. This story demonstrates that even seemingly small acts of injustice can have far-reaching consequences. It highlights the importance of standing up for what's right, even when facing powerful opposition. It shows the power of community, the strength found in collective action, and the importance of empathy and understanding. It reminds us that rules should serve people, not the other way around. And most importantly, it underscores the vital need for accessibility and inclusion for everyone. What do you think about this incredible story? Share your thoughts and experiences with HOAs in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories and updates.